This is BBC One. You were watching the Black and Black Minstrel Show. Later tonight, it's Let's Hunt and Kill Piers Morgan. But first, the satirical and observational stylings of Grimm. We're going to talk about Project Melody. Now, there's a video doing the rounds.
Digging his hole in the ground, so big and sort around it wasn't there.
Let's get the negatives.
Digging it deep, it was flat at the bottom, and the sides were steep.
Hello, lovelies. I hate to start a video with a remonstration, but you've been disappointing me a little bit as an audience recently. Your lack of sympathy and understanding towards cam girls, for example, that's been a bit blindsided me a bit, because most of you tend towards the more sort of libertarian side and share concerns about automation and so on. There's no stopping it, but you can at least sympathise with the victims of automation and technical displacement and all the rest of it. And also, it's surprised me that so many of you are so dead set against the BBC. The BBC is pretty much an A to Z of all quality television that has been on in the UK in the past or in the present. 1984, Ab-Fab, fucking Bagpuss, Billy Elliot, Blackadder, they do films as well, by the way, Blue Peter, Blue Planet, very important documentary, Bod, and that's people both on the left and the right, which would probably surprise people on either side if they ever communicated with each other. And my position in the sort of political no man's land, at least socially, if not ideologically, has afforded me an opportunity to see both sides being very angry with the BBC, which would suggest that the BBC is actually succeeding in being somewhat non-partisan and thereby pissing everybody off. Brideshead Revisited, Biker Grove, Kathy Come Home, Chucklevision, up your end, Civilization, Cracker, Dad's Army, Doctor Who, Fast Food Nation, they were involved in that. 40 Towers, come on, 40 Towers, it's worth the licence fee alone. Grange Hill, Hancock's Half Hour, Have I Got News For You, which is a very old but very successful show, which has held politicians to account better than the News and Politics division, quite frankly. Horrible Histories, come on, that's fantastic. For kids, but it's as good as Blackadder. But the BBC is under threat as never before. Boris Johnson and the Conservative government are threatening it. Dominic Cummings wants to get rid of it, and he's the person who's actually in charge. During the election, Boris Johnson and the Conservative Party threatened Channel 4 with defunding. Channel 4 is partially publicly funded, whereas the BBC is completely publicly funded. And really, those are the only two sets of channels that are really worth watching ever, BBC output and Channel 4 output. This threat is political, and it's happening despite a distinct rightward shift in the BBC's News and Politics output, and a timidity and an unwillingness to challenge the Conservative Party. And this has taken place over many years, the BBC being accused of partisanship and having an either left or right-wing bias, depending who's in government at the time. And the quality has shifted, but it's because of that threat and because of that decrease in independence from government, in my not-so-humble opinion. But let's frame this in a larger context. iClav divs, as we call it, Inspector Norse, Inspector Norse. Yeah, I'm mixing Noggin the Nog and Inspector Morse. Jackanory, you've got to admire a book reading show for children that puts Rick fucking Mail on it. And Willie Rushton's version of Winnie the Pooh was fantastic. Can't find it anywhere. Jim Will Fix It. Alright, maybe not that one. Later with Jules Holland. Live Aid was on the BBC. Mastermind. Monty Python's Flying Circus. Wouldn't have that without the BBC. Morecambe and Wise. Mr. Bean. Mr. Ben. The whole Narnia series. That's hardly progressive and woke now, is it? News Round. News for Kids. There is a huge problem with the media, most especially the news media, in general. All kinds of reporting. Any veterans of Gamergate will know the kind of thing that we're talking about, because we were making those arguments in 2014 and before, and now they've become part of the national conversation, but people blame Gamergate when they should be acknowledging them as the heralds, the bearers of bad news. Don't shoot the messenger. You could have cleaned up your act before these things went into the overculture, but you didn't. There is a huge problem with bias, and this is for a number of reasons. Firstly, if you pick a political camp and you set up your stall in that camp, then you have a built-in audience. This is what Fox News has done. This is what the Daily Mail has done. This is what the Sun has done. This is what the Guardian does, right? But it decreases the quality of their reporting, whether it's the Guardian or the Telegraph or Fox News or MSNBC or whatever else, because everything has this spin towards what they imagine that their audience wants to hear, rather than presenting their audience with what they need to hear, or giving them both sides of the argument where applicable, or instead of presenting the news, they present a news. And when it comes to blogs and so on, as we discovered during Gamergate, the pay just isn't there. So a lot of people who are doing it are either disassociated and disconnected, or even contemptuous of their audiences, and they're also doing it for reasons other than pay, like activism, things that make up the difference for them, make it feel like they're doing something worthwhile, rather than the job, which in games media is a sort of consumer advocacy, and it's supposed to be an impartial presentation of the facts, whether a game has good graphics, good sound, good quality, good gameplay, good controls, whatever, and then an opinion summation of all of that, so that you are empowered to make a decision whether to buy it or not. Instead, we get lectures, right? And that's just games media, but the same thing happens worse and on a grander scale in other forms of media, and it's a real problem when it comes to news media. Nog in the Nog, like I mentioned before. Not the 9 o'clock news, wouldn't have Rowan Atkinson or a whole bunch of other people, Smith and Jones, without that. One Foot in the Grave, I didn't believe it. Only Fools and Horses, hate it. This isn't things that I like, this is just things that are culturally important and that people in general respect. Open All Hours, Parkinson, lots of important interviews on there. Parsley the Lion, Pennies from Heaven, Pingu, Play School, Porridge, Postman Pat, and his black and white cat. QI, Stephen Fry's worth the license fee just for existing, I think. So you got bias, you got partisanship, you got this lack of ethics that comes in because a lot of these people haven't had the proper training. A lot of these places don't have a code of conduct, or if they do have a code of conduct or an ethical construct that they're supposed to follow, they don't enforce it. So you get bad reporting, you get things being revealed that shouldn't be revealed, you get sources being exposed that shouldn't be exposed, and so on and so on and so on, because either people don't care, or they're activists rather than journalists, or there's all kinds of reasons. But money is a big one, and this is the thing we're going to keep returning to over and over again. The bottom line is important. A lot of these magazines, blogs, newspapers, you name it, they're kind of teetering on the brink of collapse. And so if ethics have to go by the by in order to get clicks and that sweet ad revenue and maybe some subscriptions, then that's the way they're going to go, because survival. Clickbait is the biggest example of that. So many misleading headlines, so much spun news and fake news and so on, and they're just trying to grab people's attention by the most underhanded methods possible, and it works, but it contributes to the downward spiral of media. And most of this comes back down to a lack of resources. The old financing model that made newspapers and news channels and so on work doesn't really anymore. The bottom's fallen out of advertising. Audiences are down for television in particular as more and more people move online, and even then, ad blocks and so on make that not so viable. Not that anyone really wants to be bombarded with ads. So you can't really operate your business on that basis. Subscriptions, people don't take them up, particularly when there's lots of competing services. They might pay for one. The inability of the internet to introduce microtransactions is a big part of the problem here. It's something that it's a problem that Bitcoin and similar things could genuinely solve if they weren't a nest of vipers, which is a huge problem. But all of this has contributed to a loss of trust in the media. It's all been burnt away by the clickbait and the lack of ethics and the partisanship. It's the naked, bald political partisanship that's going on. Nobody trusts the media anymore, and while it's the media's fault for allowing standards to go down, you can sort of understand why that has gone down, because the finance isn't there. Yeah, they've got to go for cheap people, not good people. They can't have enough reporters to have a proper investigative wing. Yeah, there's not enough people doing fact-checking and checking ethical issues. There's not enough editorial oversight and so on, because they can't compete with the more agile but less polished online media, such as me here telling you things now. But I would always encourage you, whenever you watch any of my videos, to do some of your own independent research. I'm not here to be your guru or anything. I'm just here to present my point of view, and I want to be absolutely upfront about that as much as possible. I kind of assume you know that, but still. Quatermass, Record Breakers, Rent a Ghost. I wanted to be Timothy Claypole when I grew up. Kind of am. So much Shakespeare. Soap operas, not my bag, but people like them. Spike Milligan's Q series, underwatched, undervalued, but massively important. Steptoe and Son, Swap Shop. Of course, without that, I maybe wouldn't have had Noel Edmonds. So yeah, the BBC giveth and the BBC taketh away. Teletubbies, that was the week that was. The Ascent of Man, The Borrowers, Box of Delights, that freaked me out as a kid. The Clangers, The Fall and Rise of Reginald Perrin, The Forsyth Saga, The Good Life, Goon Show, come on, very important, no pythons with no Goon Show. The Magic Roundabout, The Nazis, A Warning from History, The Old Grey Whistle Test, The Railway Children, The Really Wild Show, where Chris Packham got his start, The Royal Family, Singing Detective, Threads. I still use the armed, bandaged traffic warden as my thumbnail for the morning after the night before. So, most of these problems fall back down to funding. And you can't get it from advertising, can't get it from subscriptions. What other option is there? A lot of reporters have their own independent Patreons, and they put stories that they haven't managed to sell up for people, that sort of thing. But that doesn't solve the problem for the media as a whole. It might solve the problem for individual reporters. I support Violet Blue on Patreon. She reports on the intersection of tech and adult work and censorship. So yeah, that's massively important and interesting to me, and she does make it worthwhile helping her out. I would recommend that to a lot of people, but a lot of others just don't. They just want the support, but they're continually just working in traditional sort of legacy media, which isn't necessarily paying the bills anymore, the writers' bills, let alone their own bills. So how do you solve that? So this is where we come back to the BBC. Now, the BBC is state media, but that is a rather misleading term. If you say state media, you probably start thinking about that lovely shouty Korean lady on North Korean television. That kind of state media is a puppet and a mouthpiece for the government, and the BBC is not. What else have we got? Till Death Do Us Part, that was licensed out in various versions in all manners of other country. Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, an important formative series. Tony Hart and Morph. Lots of kids' artistic spark was given by that. Top of the Pops, hugely important during its day, and a massively important archive of pop music. Walking with Dinosaurs, Wallace and Gromit. We need to talk about Kevin. Why Don't You? Only on the BBC would you get a TV show encouraging you to turn off the television and go out. Yes Minister, Yes Prime Minister. Z-Cars, without which we wouldn't have Brian Bloody Blessed. And the fucking news. It's the only place, really, other than Channel 4, which is also partially publicly funded and also under threat, let us not forget, that you can get the news, that you can get in-depth reporting and shows that treat you like a grown-up and show you the quality of the output, teach you things. That's the place where you can get it. Look at the History Channel. What did it used to be? History documentaries. What is it now? Hitler and aliens. That is what private finance gets you, chasing the lowest common denominator. The BBC, due to its funding model, can afford to be genuinely educational, genuinely cultural, genuinely important and impartial. We should, if anything, be reasserting its independence politically and financially from government and from private enterprise, or it's all going to go to shit. Zang. I have a woefully undersubscribed subreddit, so please do me a favour, if you're a Redditor, head on over to r/postmortem studios and talk about anything related to any of my shenanigans. Peace. Postmortem Studios, role-playing games, and a lot more to die for. Post-mort.com. Grim gave a big yawn and settled down to sleep. And of course, when Grim goes to sleep, all of his friends go to sleep too. The people on the internet were just text on a screen, the collectibles were just cheap plastic tat, and the books were just elaborate sandwiches made of wood and paper. Even Grim himself, once he was asleep, was just an old saggy goth twat, baggy and a bit loose at the seams, and nobody loved him.
And this is not a time to be dismayed. This is punk rock time. This is what Joe Strummer trained you for. It is now time to go. You're a good person. That means more now than ever.